12 chairs bolted together in rows of 4, a vending machine with a burned-out light in the C column, a television mounted high in the corner, with the sound off and closed captions running a weather report for a county 300 miles away, a corkboard with a pamphlet about hand-washing and a pamphlet about strokes, and a curling flyer for a 5K that had already happened, a water fountain, a trash can with a swinging lid, a woman asleep sitting up with her purse in her lap, and a man in the third row, leaning back with his boots crossed at the ankle, holding his phone at arm's length and laughing at something on the screen. That is a complete inventory of a hospital waiting room in a small town in Idaho at 4:10 in the morning, and I want you to hold on to it because everything that happens in this story turns on the last item in that list. My name is Nathan, and I've spent 6 years reading through cases like this one. Court files, appellate opinions, the transcripts nobody clicks on, trying to understand something that I think most people get exactly backward. We assume that when a bad thing is protected by money and family and a whole county's worth of favors, the person who breaks it has to be louder, angrier, and more violent than the people protecting it. That's the fantasy. It's almost never what actually happens. What actually happens is that somebody who is very, very good at one specific unglamorous skill finally points that skill at the right thing. The man in this story had that skill. His whole profession, the real one, the one under the vague sentence on his enlistment record, was describing things accurately to people who were very far away and getting them all to arrive at the same moment. He'd been doing it for 18 years in places he still can't name. And on the morning of the 15th of March, he walked into that waiting room, took one look at the third row, and started doing his job. Sean Mowbray had been in the air for 31 hours, in 4 different aircraft, the last of which was a Cessna 208, flown by a contractor out of Boise, who did not ask questions and did not offer coffee. He'd gotten the call on a Tuesday at what was, for him, the middle of the night and, for Idaho, the middle of the afternoon. The call did not come from his wife. It came from a woman named Angela Kendricks, who was the charge nurse on the night shift at Cade County Regional, and who had, at some cost to herself, looked up the emergency contact on a 9-year-old's intake sheet, found a name that was not the mother's, and dialed a number that routed through 3 switchboards before it reached a satellite phone in a place with no name. She had said 11 words before he'd fully woken up. "Mr. Mowbray, your daughter is in surgery. You should come now." The Air Force does not, generally, pull a man off a classified rotation because a family member is hurt. The Air Force pulled Sean Mowbray off that rotation in under 4 hours, and the reason it did that is a small detail that matters later. His team sergeant, a man named Rob Jarrow, had read Angela Kendricks's second sentence, the one about the surgeon's initial assessment, and had gone directly to a colonel with it, and the colonel had picked up a phone. Sean did not sleep on any of the 4 aircraft. He sat with his back straight and his hands flat on his thighs and did the only thing he had ever known how to do with fear, which was to convert it into a list. He wrote the list on the back of a customs form. What I know, what I don't know, what I need, who can get it. Under what I know, he wrote 3 lines. Laurel is alive. She is in surgery. The nurse called me and not Shannon. That third line was the one that would not leave him alone for 31 hours. To understand why, you need to understand what Sean Mowbray actually did for a living, and it is not what people picture. People hear special operations and they picture a door coming off its hinges. That's a different job. Sean's job, Air Force Special Tactics, Combat Control, 18 years of it, was to go into a place before anybody else did, usually alone or with one other man, and build a picture. Where the ridgelines were, which road was passable at night, where the wires ran, which building had people in it and which one only looked like it did, and then to describe that picture, precisely, in a specific vocabulary, over a radio, to men in aircraft 90 miles away who could not see any of it, and to make them all arrive at the same second. That's the whole trade: observation, precision of language, and synchronization. He had a talent for the third one, that other men in his career field talked about the way musicians talk about a drummer with impossible time. He could get 4 completely separate organizations, with 4 different radios, 4 different sets of rules, and 4 different bosses, to put their assets on the same target within a 4-second window. He had done it in weather that grounded everything. He had done it twice with no radio at all, using a signal mirror and a pre-briefed schedule, because he had planned for the radio to fail. His wife had once described his job, at a barbecue, as, "He talks to airplanes." He hadn't corrected her. He was not a man who corrected people. He had married Shannon Dunleavy 11 years earlier, in the courthouse in Cade County, 3 weeks before a deployment, in a plain gray suit he'd bought that morning at a store that also sold work boots. She was 25, funny in a fast, biting way that he found completely disarming, and she came from the only family in that county that everyone had an opinion about. The Dunleavys had been in Cade County since the 20s. Glenn Dunleavy, Shannon's father, was 68 and owned Dunleavy Aggregate, a working quarry that had been pulling crushed rock out of the same bluff for 90 years and had paved a fair portion of southern Idaho. He also owned Cade Valley Medical Transport, which was the county's only ambulance service and had held the contract since 1994. He also owned Dunleavy Towing, which had the county's rotation. He also owned, through a holding company his wife Janet's name was on, 11 commercial buildings on the 2 blocks that made up Cinder Bluffs downtown, including the building the sheriff's substation rented. None of that is a crime. That's important to say. A family owning a lot of a small county is not a crime. It's just a physics problem. It changes what's easy and what's hard for everybody who lives there. It means the answer to almost any question in Cade County was some version of, well, you know, the Dunleavys. Sean had never lived there full time. That's the second detail that matters. In 11 years of marriage, he had been home, cumulatively, maybe 4.5 of them, in stretches. 6 weeks, 4 months, 9 weeks. Demiris, he knew the town the way you know a room you've only been in with the lights on. He could describe it, but he'd never learned where things were in the dark. Laurel was born in the 7th year. He'd made it home for that, 40 hours after, and had held her in a hospital corridor, and had done the thing men in his line of work are famous for doing badly, which is feel something so large that his entire face simply shut down. Shannon had laughed at him. He'd let her. Laurel Mowbray was 9 years old in the March this story happens. She had her mother's speed and her father's stillness, an odd and slightly unsettling combination in a child, and she had a habit that both of her parents found funny for different reasons. She narrated, out loud, constantly, in a low-running commentary. The dog is going toward the door. The truck is the loud one, not the other one. There are 2 hawks and one is bigger. She was, without anyone teaching her, doing her father's job. He'd been gone since the previous October. The last real conversation he'd had with her was on the 6th of February, on a laptop, on a connection so bad that her face froze in a smile for 11 seconds while her voice kept going. She'd told him about a science project involving vinegar. She'd told him her Uncle Ryan had built her a fort in the trees behind the cabin. She'd asked, at the end, when he was coming home, and he'd said the true thing, which was that he didn't know yet, and she'd said okay, in a small voice, that he thought about every day afterward for the rest of his life. Ryan Dunleavy was 33, Shannon's younger brother, and everyone in Cinder Bluff would have told you he was harmless. That's not a slur on the town. He was extremely good at seeming harmless. He was the family's youngest, the one Glenn had given up on in a mild, indulgent way, and he lived alone in a cabin on the back of the Dunleavy property, 11 miles up a county road, where he ran a trapline he didn't need to run, and did odd work at the quarry when someone made him. He was funny with kids in the specific way that adults who don't have their own are sometimes funny with kids. No rules, no bedtimes, a 4-wheeler and a bag of candy, and a total absence of the word no. He also had, if you knew how to look, an 11-year history of dead animals found in a very particular condition on the north end of the county, and a boy named Casey Newbold who had stopped talking for 4 months in 2019, and whose family had moved to Nampa without explaining why. Nobody knew how to look. Shannon worked at Cade Valley Family Clinic, which her father's holding company owned the building for, running the front office, and, since the previous spring, picking up doubles because the clinic had lost 2 people and hadn't replaced them. That meant that from about 2:30 in the afternoon until 7 or 8 at night, 3 or 4 days a week, somebody else had Laurel. For about 14 months, that somebody had been Ryan. There had been signs. There are always signs, and the cruelty of them is that they are only legible afterward. In November, Laurel had stopped wanting to be dropped off. Shannon had mentioned it on a call, as a joke, as a thing kids do. She gets clingy in the car. It takes 10 minutes. It's exhausting. In December, she'd started sleeping with the lamp on, which Shannon reported the way you report weather. In January, she'd asked her mother, twice, whether it was true that if you tell on somebody the police come and take you away too, and Shannon had said don't be silly, and had not asked where the question came from. And in February, on the bad video call, when Laurel was telling her father about the fort in the trees behind the cabin, she had said one sentence that Sean would take apart in a motel room 2 months later for 6 hours. She'd said, "It's got a floor, so it's fine." He'd said, "Huh?" And she'd said, "The fort. It's got a floor now, so it's fine." He had not understood it. There was nothing to understand from 7,000 miles away through a connection that froze her face for 11 seconds at a time. But he'd noticed it, in the small, automatic way he noticed things, and he'd written it in the green, Write in the Rain notebook he carried in his left chest pocket, because that is what he did with things he noticed and could not place. That notebook, a $4 object, 160 pages, water-resistant, standard issue in his career field, would eventually be entered as evidence. Not because anything in it proved a crime, because a defense attorney tried to argue that Sean Mowbray had constructed his suspicions after the fact, and there, in his own handwriting, on a page dated the 6th of February, 5 weeks before a hospital, were 9 words. L. It's got a floor now, so it's fine. There was also a fight, and this matters because it's the closest anybody came. At Christmas, Sean had gotten 11 days, the first leave he'd had in 14 months. He had watched Ryan Dunleavy pick Laurel up under the arms at a family dinner and swing her, and had watched his daughter go absolutely still. Not upset, still. Her body had gone the way a rabbit's does. He had said something to Shannon that night in the guest room of her parents' house, and it had turned into the worst argument of their marriage, and the thing he had said was not an accusation. He hadn't had one. What he'd said was, "I don't like the way she goes quiet around your brother." And Shannon had gone off like a struck match, because he had touched the exact thing that everyone in that house had spent 30 years not touching. And because she knew, and because the only way to keep not knowing was to make him the problem. She had said, "You're gone 11 months a year, and you come home and diagnose my family in 4 days." She had said, "You don't get a vote on this." And Sean Mowbray, who had 8 days of leave left, and a wife crying in a guest room and no evidence of anything at all, had said the thing that a decent, careful, entirely wrong man says. He'd said, "Okay. I'm sorry, I'm probably reading it wrong." He has said, in the one interview he ever gave, that those 7 words are the ones he will be paying off for the rest of his life. I want to be fair to him, because it's easy to be cheap about this. He had no proof. He had a still child at a dinner table, and a wife telling him he was a stranger in her family's house. 99 times out of 100, the man who escalates in that room is wrong, and is destructive, and wrecks something. The problem is that in this story he was in the 100th room, which is exactly why the format matters. He didn't need to be certain. He needed a way to write down what he saw, with a date on it, and hand it to somebody whose job it was to be certain. And he did not do that, because it was Christmas, and it was family, and there was nothing to report except a 9-year-old going quiet. Dr. Fiona Zeller came out of the doors at 4:26 in the morning and found a man standing in the middle of the waiting room in a canvas jacket over a flight suit he hadn't changed out of in 2 days, and she did what surgeons do, which is deliver information in the flattest possible voice, because the flatness is a kindness. She told him his daughter was out of surgery and stable. She told him they had repaired a laceration of the left forearm that went down to the fascia, debrided and closed 11 separate wounds on the back and the backs of the thighs, and set a fractured left ring finger. She told him the finger had been broken and had begun to heal and had been broken again. Then she stopped and looked at the floor for a second, and looked back up and said the sentence. 51 wounds, different tools used. This took days. Sean Mowbray did not move. He did not ask a question. He said, "Thank you, doctor." Then he said, "Is there a protocol for documenting this that you are supposed to follow?" She said yes. He said, "Has anyone told you not to follow it?" And Dr. Fiona Zeller, 41 years old, 5 years into a job in a county where the ambulance service, the medical transport contract, the clinic her referrals came from, and the building she rented her house from, all traced back to one family, when a color he'd seen on people in other countries and said, in a voice that had lost its flatness entirely, "I need to make a phone call." That is the first thing Sean Mowbray did in this story. He did not raise his voice. He asked a professional whether she was being prevented from doing her job, in a public room, at 4:26 in the morning, in front of a nurse named Angela Kendricks, and a security camera mounted above the vending machine that recorded 96 hours before it overwrote. By 6 that morning there was a complete forensic photographic set, a body map, measurements, a wound pattern narrative, and a mandatory report filed with the state, none of which had been done in the 11 hours since Laurel had arrived. Then he turned around and looked at the third row. Ryan Dunleavy was still there. He'd been there for 6 hours. He had gotten up twice for the vending machine. He was leaning back with his boots crossed, and when he saw Sean looking at him, he lit up like a man at an airport who has spotted his ride. He stood up and crossed the room with his hand out and said, Hey, look at you. They actually let you come home." Sean shook his hand. "I want to be precise about this moment, because it's the hinge of the whole story, and because it is the thing people find hardest to believe." Sean Mowbray, who had 31 hours of no sleep in him and a surgeon's sentence about tools sitting in his chest like a swallowed stone, shook that man's hand and held it for a beat and said, "How is she doing? You've been here all night." And Ryan Dunleavy, who had come to the hospital and stayed 6 hours for exactly one reason, which was that he needed to be near it, said, "Oh man, it's rough. She's a tough kid though, tougher than you'd think." Then he said the thing. He said, "You want to see something?" And he turned his phone around. Here is what most men do. Most men take the phone, or take the man, or take the room apart. Here is what Sean Mowbray did. He said, "Hold it still, the light's bad." And he took out his own phone, and he photographed the screen. 41 times, in 19 seconds, as Ryan Dunleavy swiped, grinning, narrating. "That's from the cabin. That's the fort we built. Look at her face there." Because a man who has done something and gotten away with it does not want to be caught. He wants to be seen. Sean had learned that in rooms in 3 countries, the need to be witnessed will eventually beat the instinct to hide. Every single time, you just have to be the kind of man who can stand there and let it happen. 41 photographs of a phone screen, taken in a public waiting room, in front of a camera, by a man withstanding, at 4:39 in the morning. Ryan put the phone away and said, "Don't tell Shannon I showed you, she gets weird about the pictures." Sean said, "Okay." And then he walked outside into the parking lot and stood in the cold and threw up behind a snowbank and then took out the customs form and added a line to the list. Under what I know, in block letters, he photographs it. Under what I need, every device he has ever owned. The detective arrived at 9:40 that morning. His name was Keith Newbold. He had been with the Cade County Sheriff's Office for 19 years, and he took a report standing up, in the corridor, with his notebook against his forearm, which is what a man does when he has decided in advance how long he will be staying. He asked 5 questions. He wrote for maybe 90 seconds. And when Sean gave him the account of the waiting room and said the word photographs, Detective Newbold stopped writing. He said, "Mr. Mowbray, I'm going to be straight with you, because I don't think it's fair to string you along." He said, "His family owns half this county." He said, "Nobody's touching him." Then he shrugged. It was a small shrug, a lift of one shoulder, the kind of gesture a man makes when he's describing weather. He wasn't being cruel. It was worse than cruel. It was the shrug of a man reporting a fact about the physical universe. Sean said, "Understood. Thank you for your time." Detective Keith Newbold would later say, on a witness stand, that in 19 years the only thing that had ever frightened him more than that response was the 4 seconds of silence before it. By that afternoon there was a temporary protective order. It had been filed at 11:20 a.m. by a Boise firm the Dunleavy Holding Company kept on retainer, on behalf of Shannon Mowbray, and it alleged that Sean Mowbray had a documented history of combat-related psychological instability, had made a threatening statement in a hospital waiting room that morning, and represented a credible risk to the minor child. It requested that he be barred from the hospital, from the marital residence, and from all contact with Laurel pending a hearing. A judge signed it ex parte at 2:50 p.m., because judges sign those, because the cost of being wrong in the other direction is a dead child. At 3:31 p.m., a deputy served Sean Mowbray in the hospital cafeteria. He read all 4 pages. He asked one question: "What time do I need to be off the property?" And he was off the property 8 minutes later. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He did not ask to say goodbye to his daughter, because the order said no contact and he was not going to hand them a violation on the first afternoon. He drove 40 minutes to a motel outside Twin Falls, paid cash for 11 nights, sat down on the end of the bed with his boots still on, and did not move for a long time. Then he took out a legal pad and wrote at the top of the first page, "Target folder." 19 days is a long time in a motel room. He kept a schedule because a man without a schedule in a room like that comes apart. Up at 5, run 6 miles on the frontage road in the dark, shower, legal pad from 6 to 11, drive somewhere and physically look at something from 11 to 3, legal pad again until 8, lights out at 9:30. He ate the same 2 things for 19 days and could not, afterward, remember what they were. He read the Idaho Code on mandatory reporting, twice, on a library computer in Twin Falls, taking notes by hand because he did not want a print job with his name on it in that county. He read the state's administrative rules on child protective investigations, which is where he learned that a screening decision has a timeline and that 9 days is not one of them. He read the federal regulations governing explosives licensees until the numbers stopped swimming. He drove the road between the Dunleavy property and the hospital 4 times with a stopwatch, and then a 5th time at 3:40 in the afternoon on a Wednesday to match the light and the traffic, because a measurement taken under different conditions is not a measurement. He spent 2 full days in the Cade County Clerk's office, and this is the part that people find funny, and that is actually the most important tactical decision he made. He did not go in with a story. He did not use a fake name. He walked up to the counter, said he'd like to look at the county's public records on the quarry, filled out the form with his real name and his real address, paid the copy fees in cash, and said thank you. Because a man sneaking around a county clerk's office is a story that gets told at dinner. A polite man in a canvas jacket who fills out the form correctly is nothing at all. He knew, from a professional lifetime, that the most effective cover is not a disguise. It's being boring in a way that matches the environment. He did not, in 19 days, call a single person in Cade County. Not Angela Kendricks, she called him. Not the Newbolds. Not a reporter. Not his in-laws. Not Shannon. He was under an order and he obeyed it to the letter. And every day he wrote the date at the top of a page and, at the bottom, 1 line, no contact, no county entry except compliance maintained. 19 pages of that. Monica Blakemore put all 19 in front of a judge in June. And every night, at 9, before the light went out, he did the same thing. He took out the $4 green notebook, turned to the page dated the 6th of February, and read 9 words. I want to slow down here, because this is where the story stops being about a father and starts being about a specialist. And if you miss the distinction, you'll miss why it worked. A combat controller does not attack things. He describes them, and then he brings the right people, at the right time, from far enough away that the target never sees it coming. The core of the craft is a document, the target folder, which is not a plan of attack. It is a description, so complete and so verifiable that somebody else, somebody with authority and assets, can act on it without having to trust you. That is what Sean Mowbray built, in a motel room in Twin Falls, over 19 days, on legal pads, with a burner laptop, a scanner he bought at a Staples, and a phone that never once called anybody in Cade County. He started with the thing he actually knew how to read: instruments. The ambulance run sheet for Laurel's transport had been included in the hospital records his attorney requested. It said the patient had been found at the base of a hay chute at the Dunleavy property at 1540. Single witness account. Mechanism: fall. It listed the transport as Unit 4, crew of 2, and it gave a departure time of 15:52 and an arrival at Cade County Regional of 16:31. 39 minutes. Sean drove that road 4 times with a stopwatch, in the worst conditions he could contrive, at the speed limit, with a full stop at every intersection. It took 22 minutes. Then he looked at the rest of the sheet, the way he'd look at a fuel state. The oxygen cylinder was logged at 1,850 psi at pickup and 1,790 at arrival, a drop of 60. At the flow rate documented on the same sheet, 60 psi out of a D cylinder is roughly 9 minutes of oxygen, not 39. The vehicle had not been running for 39 minutes. Somebody had padded the time, and padded it clumsily, and the reason was the 17-minute gap at the other end. The 911 call was logged at 15:11, and the crew was dispatched at 15:47. Somebody at Cade Valley Medical Transport had held a 9-year-old for 36 minutes before sending a truck, and then written a run sheet to hide it. Sean did not know why yet. He wrote it down anyway, with the times, and the psi, and the flow rate, and a photograph of the cylinder gauge chart from the manufacturer's specification sheet, and he moved on, because a target folder is built by accumulation, not by insight. The second thing he pulled was public. Dunleavy Aggregate held a federal explosives license. Any quarry that shoots rock does. And a federal explosives licensee files things, acquisition and disposition records, a daily summary of magazine transactions, an annual inventory reconciliation. Most of it isn't public, but the inspection history is discoverable. The blasting notices filed with the state are public, and the seismograph reports the quarry was required to file with the county after a 2018 complaint from a neighbor were sitting, unread, in a filing cabinet in the county clerk's office, where a man with a driver's license and $11 in copy fees could read all of them. Sean read all of them. He had spent a portion of his career around demolition, enough to know what a shot looks like on paper. He compared the notices, how many holes, what depth, what pattern, against the seismograph traces, and he did the arithmetic on how much explosive it takes to move that much rock in that pattern. The paperwork said one number, the rock said a smaller one, consistently, for 6 years, in a way that came to something like 4,000 pounds of unaccounted commercial explosive product. He did not conclude anything. He wrote down the numbers, the source of each one, and the arithmetic, and he photographed every page. Then he wrote at the bottom of that section, in the language he'd been trained to use his whole adult life, assessment, discrepancy, not attributed, recommend subject matter expert review. The third thing came from Angela Kendricks, who called him on the 12th day. She was not brave in the way movies are about. She was frightened the entire time, and she said so. What she had was 19 years of charting in a county where the ambulance service and the clinic and the hospital's largest donor were the same family, and a memory that had been bothering her since 2019. A boy, 4 years old at the time, brought in with a pattern of injuries that she had flagged and that had come back from the state as unsubstantiated within 9 days, which is roughly a third of the time those investigations take. She gave Sean 2 things: the boy's first name, Casey, and the name of the CPS caseworker who had closed it, which she remembered because the woman had a distinctive last name and had left the state agency 4 months later to take a job doing intake for Cade Valley Family Clinic. Sean wrote it down. He did not call the family. He did not call the caseworker. He put it in the folder under a heading he'd used 100 times in his professional life, pattern of life, because that was the actual discovery, and it took him until the 14th day to see it. He had been building a folder on a man. What he had was a folder on a system. Ryan Dunleavy had not gotten away with anything for 11 years because he was clever. He had gotten away with it because every single mechanism a community uses to catch a man like him, the ambulance that documents the scene, the clinic that sees the child every 3 months, the caseworker who screens the report, the deputy who takes the call, the evidence room that holds the photographs, the building the sheriff's substation rents, ran through one family, and that family had never had to conspire about it. They just had to keep being the people who signed the checks. Nobody had to be evil. Everybody just had to shrug. And that meant Sean Mowbray's problem was not a problem of proof. It was a problem he had spent 18 years solving in another language entirely. How do you strike a target that has early warning? You do not go through the warning system. You go over it, and you arrive everywhere at once. The Dunlevys tried to kill him on the night of the 3rd of April. He'd driven to Cinder Bluff that evening for a scheduled, court-supervised, lawyer-arranged records exchange at the county courthouse, the only thing the protective order allowed him to do in that town, and he had done it exactly by the book, arriving at 5 o'clock, leaving at 5:20, signing the log at both ends. He took the canyon road out because it was 11 minutes shorter, and because 11 days earlier he had driven every road out of that town, at night, with a stopwatch and a notebook, the way he would have prepped an exfil route in any other country. The tow truck came out of a pullout at the top of the grade with its lights off, and put him into the guardrail at the tightest bend on the road, and then backed up and came at him a second time. His truck went through the rail and stopped 40 feet down a scree slope against a boulder, upside down, and Sean Mowbray hung in the belt for a moment, doing the thing he did, which was inventory. Hands, feet, neck, ribs. 1, maybe 2. Fuel smell, no. Sound of a diesel idling above him, yes. 2 doors opening, yes. Voices, 2, male. He unbuckled, dropped onto the roofliner, and did not go up the slope. He went down it, into the dark, into the creek bottom, and lay in 8 inches of snowmelt in a canvas jacket for 50 minutes, while 2 men swept the slope above him with flashlights, and called him a word that the transcript renders as 11 times. Then he walked, 11 miles, in the dark, without a light, without a phone call, because he had made a decision at the bottom of that slope that his attorney would later describe as the single most disciplined act she'd seen from a client in 22 years. He was not going to be a man in a fight. He was going to be a victim with a record. At 6:40 in the morning, he walked into the state police post at Jerome, 31 miles away, wet to the chest and gray with cold, and he handed a trooper 3 things: the dashcam card out of his truck, which had recorded the pullout and the first impact, and 11 seconds of a truck's front bumper. The satellite messenger clipped inside his jacket, which had been logging a breadcrumb track every 10 minutes for 19 days, and put him on that road, at that speed, at that second, on a state police independent server in Texas, and a handwritten page, made at 5:55 a.m., on a napkin in a gas station, listing the times, the vehicle description, and the 2 voices. He did not mention the Dunlevys, not once. He described a tow truck. The trooper ran the description and found that Dunlevy Towing operated a fleet telematics system, the kind every commercial fleet runs now, that logs speed and position every 15 seconds so the owner can see who's idling, and that a subpoena for it would go to a third-party vendor in Salt Lake City, not to anybody in Cade County. That subpoena is the moment the ground moved. Not because of what it proved about the road, because of what a federal healthcare fraud analyst noticed 4 weeks later, when she cross-referenced that same telematics data against the ambulance billing records for Cade Valley Medical Transport, a company under the same fleet account, and found 406 billed patient transports in 3 years for which the vehicles in question had never left the yard. Sean Mowbray did not find that. He would say so, later, every time somebody tried to give him credit for it. He just described a tow truck to the right agency, at a moment when they had a reason to pull the thread. That is the whole job. That is what he does. The person who broke the family open from the inside was 16 years old. Zoe Dunlevy was Ryan's niece, the daughter of Mark Dunlevy, who ran Cade Valley Medical Transport, and who was the one who had held the ambulance for 36 minutes on the 15th of March because his brother had called him first and asked him to. Zoe had been at every Sunday dinner of her entire life. She had heard the way the adults in that family talked about Ryan, the pauses, the way somebody would change the subject with a specific kind of lightness, and she had done what a certain kind of watchful teenager does, which is start writing it down. Not as evidence, as sanity. She had 4 years of it in the notes app of a phone her father paid for, which is why she had never dared to sync it to anything. What made her act was not the hospital. She hadn't been told the details. What made her act was a Sunday, 3 weeks after, at that dinner table, when somebody said Laurel's name, and her grandmother Janet said, in the same light voice, "Well, she was always a climber." Zoe went upstairs, sat on the edge of the tub with the water running, and emailed 4 years of notes to a public defender in Twin Falls, whose name she'd gotten off a billboard because she did not know how to find anybody else. The public defender read it, put it down, put her coat on, and drove it to the FBI resident agency in Boise herself. The agent who caught it was named Adam Fenimore, and he had been sitting on a healthcare fraud referral out of Cade County for 5 weeks, waiting for a reason to like it. Sean Mowbray met Special Agent Adam Fenimore for the first time on the 19th of April, in a conference room in Boise, and handed him a binder. Fenimore has described that binder in 2 different interviews since, and both times he has laughed in a way that isn't really a laugh. It was 240 pages. Every claim had a source line. Every source had a date and a method of acquisition. Nothing was concluded. Where Sean had an opinion, it was labeled assessment and set apart in its own paragraph so it could be discarded without damaging the facts around it. There was a tab for the ambulance timeline with the oxygen cylinder arithmetic, a tab for the blasting discrepancy with the seismograph traces and the copy fee receipts from the county clerk, a tab for the 2019 report with a name and a 9-day closure and a caseworker's subsequent employer, a tab labeled devices that listed, by model and approximate date, every phone, camera, tablet, and laptop Sean had personally observed in Ryan Dunleavy's possession over 11 years of family holidays, with the observation date for each, and a tab labeled 15 March, waiting room, containing 41 photographs of a phone screen, a screenshot of the hospital's camera retention policy, a note that the footage would overwrite at 96 hours, and the date and time, 4:39 a.m., 15 March, that Sean had first told a sworn officer that the footage existed. That last part is the one that turned a case into a conviction, and it had nothing to do with courage. Sean had told Detective Newbold about the photographs at 9:52 a.m. on the 15th. Newbold had shrugged and done nothing. But he had written the word photographs in his notebook. Sean had watched him write it. And a notebook is a record, and a record with a time on it, sitting next to a camera system that overwrote at 96 hours, is a document about somebody's choices. Fenimore said, at the end of the second hour, "Mr. Mowbray, what do you actually want here?" And Sean said the sentence that his attorney, Monica Blakemore, has quoted in 3 separate closing arguments since. He said, "I want everybody to arrive at the same time." He explained it the way he'd have explained it to a flight lead. You have 4 separate problems in one county, and they all share a phone tree. The moment any one of you knocks on any one door, every other door gets a phone call, and things start going into wood stoves. I don't need you to be fast. I need you to be simultaneous. Fenimore said that would be 4 different agencies with 4 different timelines and 4 different bosses, and that it was, respectfully, not how any of this works. Sean said, "I know. That's the part I do." He did not run it, of course. He's a civilian in this story, and no federal agency lets a civilian coordinate anything. What he did was build the product that made the coordination cheap, a synchronization matrix, 1 page, that laid out every location, what was at it, who would want it, what would be destroyed if the others moved first, and, critically, a proposed order of execution with a suggested window and the reason for each choice. It is, Fenimore said later, the single most useful page a victim's family member has ever handed him. The morning of the 11th of June was clear and already warm at 6. At 06 o'clock, in 5 locations across Cade County, the following happened inside a span of about 11 minutes. Agents from ATF and the Idaho State Police entered the Dunleavy Aggregate Magazine Yard with an inspection warrant and an inventory team. FBI agents and HHS OIG investigators entered the offices of Cade Valley Medical Transport and Cade Valley Family Clinic simultaneously and took the servers, the run sheets, and a fireproof cabinet in Mark Dunleavy's office that turned out to contain, among other things, a handwritten ledger of held calls. A separate team executed a warrant at the Cade County Sheriff's Office Evidence Storage Facility, which was a converted equipment shed on land the Dunleavy Holding Company owned, and which had no functioning chain of custody log for the preceding 6 years. 2 agents and a sheriff's deputy from a neighboring county, deliberately, a deputy from anywhere else, knocked on the door of a cabin 11 miles up a county road and arrested Ryan Dunleavy, who was asleep, and who said, on the recording, before anyone had said a word to him about why, "Is this about the pictures?" And at Glenn Dunleavy's house on the hill above the quarry, A woman in a windbreaker with 3 letters on the back handed a 68-year-old man a piece of paper while his wife stood in the doorway in a robe. Nobody got a phone call. That was the entire trick. That was 18 years of a specific and unglamorous profession, applied one time, in Idaho, to his own family. They found 9 devices at the cabin. 2 of them were in a pelican case, buried under 16 inches of gravel beneath the woodpile, which Ryan Dunleavy had believed was a clever place to put them, and which was, in fact, the first place a man with a metal detector looked. The forensic report ran to 61 pages. I'm not going to describe its contents, and I'd ask you not to imagine them. The case did not turn on them anyway. What it established, in a way no defense could touch, was chronology. 11 distinct sessions over 14 months, and for Laurel specifically, 3 visits across 11 days in March, which is why a surgeon said this took days when she counted 51 wounds and 11 different tool patterns. There were 4 other children. Casey Newbold was one of them. The 2019 report that had been closed as unsubstantiated in 9 days had been closed by a caseworker who took a job at a Dunleavy-owned clinic 4 months later, and Detective Keith Newbold, 19 years with the Cade County Sheriff's Office, was Casey's uncle. That's why he shrugged. Not because he was bought, because in 2019 he had made a private, cowardly, entirely human calculation. He had a nephew who had stopped talking, a family that wanted it to go away, and a certainty that fighting the Dunleavis would cost him his job and his house and would not save the boy. So he'd let it die, and he had spent 5 years telling himself it was over. And when a man in a canvas jacket said the word photographs in a hospital corridor, what Keith Newbold felt was not indifference. It was the specific vertigo of a man watching the exact thing he had let go come back with a different child's name on it. He testified for 2 days. He did not minimize anything he'd done. He said, at one point, when the prosecutor asked why he had shrugged, "Because I had already decided years ago that it was true." He lost his certification, pled to a misdemeanor charge of official misconduct, and served no time, and there are people in Cade County who think that was too gentle, and people who think it was too harsh, and both of them are probably right. The hardest part of this story is not Ryan Dunleavy, it's Shannon. Sean's attorney, Monica Blakemore, had subpoenaed the phone records in the custody case as a matter of routine. She subpoenas everything, she says, because the one time you don't is the time it mattered. What came back was a 5-year extraction, and buried in it, on the 3rd of March, 12 days before the hospital, 4 days before the first of the 3 March visits, was a text message from Shannon Mowbray to her brother. It said, "She's got her dad's mouth on her lately. Maybe a day at the cabin." 11 words. Blakemore has said that she read them 4 times before she understood what she was looking at, and then she sat in her office for 20 minutes without moving. Shannon Dunleavy was not a monster, and I'm not going to pretend she was, because pretending it makes the story useless. She was a woman who had grown up inside a family where everyone knew there was something wrong with the youngest boy, and where the entire adult architecture of the household was built around never saying it out loud. She had learned, before she was 10, that the way you survive in that family is you use the thing you're not allowed to name. She had done it to her own daughter to buy quiet. She testified. It took the prosecutor 11 minutes to get her there, and when he asked her what she thought a day at the cabin would mean, she said, in a voice the transcript notes as barely audible, "I thought he'd scare her." Her parental rights were terminated in November. She pled to 2 felony counts of injury to a child by omission and is serving 8 to 15. She has not, as of this recording, ever asked to see her daughter, and Laurel has not asked to see her, and there is a version of this story where that is the saddest sentence in it. Ryan Dunleavy went to trial because his father made him. That was the last decision Glenn Dunleavy ever got to make about anything, and it was, from a defense standpoint, an act of self-immolation. A plea would have taken the forensics out of the public record. The jury was out for 4 hours and 11 minutes. He is serving life without parole on the lead count, with 4 consecutive terms stacked behind it, in a facility out of state. Glenn Dunleavy took 31 years federal on the explosives and the fraud counts combined. Mark Dunleavy took 9. Janet Dunleavy was not charged with anything and lives in a rented condominium in Ogden. The quarry was sold at auction to a company out of Utah. Cade Valley Medical Transport lost the county contract and then existed for 11 more days. The dependency hearing was on the 4th of August, and it lasted a day and a half, and the thing everybody expected to happen did not happen. Everybody expected Laurel to testify. The state had prepared for it. There was a closed-circuit setup and a child advocate and a stuffed elephant that lived in a drawer in the courthouse for exactly this purpose. Her father had spent 3 weeks bracing for the day he would have to sit in a room while his daughter was asked, gently, by strangers, to describe 11 days. She never took the stand. She didn't have to, because of a 14-minute recording made on the 21st of March in a hospital room in Boise by a forensic interviewer named Priya, who is very good at her job and who asked open questions and never once said a name. 12 minutes in, Laurel Mowbray, 9 years old, 6 days out of her 4th surgery, did the thing she had been doing her whole life without knowing why. She narrated. She said the room had a green door, and the green door had a bar on it, and the bar made a sound. She said there was a tool board with the shapes drawn on it in black marker, so you knew where things went, and she listed which shapes had no tool in them. She said there was a calendar from a feed store with a picture of a horse on it, and the horse was on the top part and the numbers were on the bottom part, and that the numbers had a red circle around one of them, and she said which one. She said the light was a bulb with a cage on it, and it made a hum you could only hear when the generator stopped. Every single one of those details was verified inside 11 days. The tool board with the outlined shapes, the feed store calendar with a red circle on the 14th, the caged bulb, the generator, which the cabin ran on because Ryan Dunleavy had never connected to the grid. A 9-year-old, without a single leading question, had given the state of Idaho a room, a date, and an inventory. Monica Blakemore said afterward that in 22 years of family law, she had never watched a case close the way that one closed, not on emotion, not on a confession, but on a child's ability to describe a light fixture. The judge terminated Shannon Mowbray's parental rights on the 11th of November and granted sole legal and physical custody to a father who had been, 5 months earlier, legally barred from being in the same building as his own daughter. He read the order twice in the hallway, folded it in half, put it in his left chest pocket next to a green notebook, and went to get the car. Zoe Dunleavy is 20 now, in her 2nd year at Boise State, and she does not use her last name. There are 2 more pieces of this, and then I'll get out of the way. The first is that the protective order, the one that had a judge's signature on it by 2:50 in the afternoon on the day his daughter came out of surgery, was never actually litigated. It expired. The hearing got continued twice at the Dunleavy firm's request while the federal case built, and then, on the morning it was finally set to be heard, opposing counsel withdrew from the representation entirely, and the petition was dismissed. Blakemore has said, more than once, that the single most important thing her client ever did was the thing that felt like surrender. He was served in a cafeteria at 3:31 in the afternoon, and he was off the property at 3:39, and for the next 11 weeks, he did not send one text, did not drive past one house, did not call one relative, did not post one word. Every day of that compliance was a line in a log, and every line was, in the end, an argument. The people who take away your access are, almost always, betting that you will violate the order. It is not a defensive weapon. It is a fishing lure. The men who don't bite are the ones who get their kids back. The second piece is a Tuesday in September. Laurel Mowbray had 11 surgeries between March and August. She spent 41 days in 2 hospitals. She has a scar down the inside of her left forearm and a constellation of small round ones across her back and the backs of her thighs that will fade and never leave. She was, at first, silent in a way that terrified everyone around her, including 2 very experienced pediatric trauma psychologists. The girl who had narrated everything, from the hawks to the trucks, had simply stopped. The thing that brought her back was not therapy, although therapy is what made it stick, and I want to be careful about that, because people love a story where love fixes it, and love does not fix it. Work fixes it, and love is why you do the work. What brought her back was that her father, one afternoon in a rented house outside Boise, sat on the floor with his back against the couch and started narrating, out loud, in a flat, low, running commentary, the way she used to. The refrigerator just cycled off. There's a wasp on the outside of the window. Upper right, not getting in. The mail truck is 2 streets away. You can hear it stop and start. He did it for about 10 minutes, and then he stopped, and there was a long silence, and then a 9-year-old voice from the other side of the room said, "There's a plane. It's high. You can't see it." And Sean Mowbray said, "That's right. That's exactly right. Where? Because that is the job. That's the whole job. Somebody far away who cannot see anything, and somebody on the ground who can, and the entire world depending on whether the person on the ground can describe it accurately enough for help to arrive." He teaches her the format now. He made it into a game, and then it stopped being a game, and became a thing she just does. Who, what, where, when, what I need. She's 11. She can give a 5-line report on a stranger in a parking lot that would hold up in a courtroom, and her father has been told by 2 therapists that this is either the healthiest possible adaptation or something they'll want to keep an eye on, and he has told them, politely, that he'll take the first one. So, the waiting room. 12 chairs, a vending machine with a burned-out light, a TV with the sound off, a woman asleep with her purse in her lap, and a man in the 3rd row laughing at his phone. Everybody in that room saw him, the woman with the purse, 2 nurses who walked past 3 times, a janitor. 6 other people came and went across 6 hours. Not one of them was a bad person, and not one of them did anything, because there was nothing to do. He was just a guy on his phone, and that is exactly how it always looks. And then a man walked in who had spent 18 years being paid to look at an ordinary landscape and notice the one thing in it that was wrong, and to say so, out loud, precisely, to somebody who could act. That's the part I keep chewing on. Not the arrests, not the 11-minute morning. The fact that the entire case existed inside a 12 by 20 room for 6 hours, in plain view, and it required a specific trained kind of looking. To become real. I'm not going to tell you to get trained, but I will give you the thing he teaches his daughter, because it costs nothing and because you might need it once. 5 lines. Who? A description of the person, not a judgment about them. What you observed, not what you concluded. Where? A location somebody else could find, not near the thing. When? The actual time, not a little while ago. And what I need, the specific thing you are asking for. That's it. That's the format that armies use to get help across 90 miles of nothing, and it works just as well across a parking lot. Practice it once, out loud, in your car, on something boring, a delivery truck, a dog off its leash. It feels ridiculous. Do it anyway, because the day you actually need it, your hands will be shaking and your voice will be doing something strange. And the only thing that will get through to the person on the other end is a format you didn't have to invent in that moment. Here is what I think this story is really about, and it isn't revenge, even though it is one of the most complete acts of revenge I've ever read a docket about. It's about the difference between being angry and being legible. Every single person who had ever tried to do something about Ryan Dunleavy before had done it while feeling something. The boy's mother in 2019, the nurse who flagged the chart, the detective who knew. All of them were right. None of them were legible. Their alarm was a feeling, and feelings do not survive contact with a county. Sean Mowbray was, I promise you, angrier than any of them. He simply had a professional habit of converting the thing he felt into a thing that other people could act on. A page with times on it, and a source line under every claim. That's not a personality. That's a skill. It's the least glamorous skill in this entire story, and it is the only one that mattered. The tools were his. The rage was his. The 11-minute morning belonged to about 200 federal employees who had never met him. All he did was describe it well enough to enough of the right people that they all showed up at once.